Welcome to Act and React. I'm Edward Gibbons Brown. This brand new platform for discussion, such as it is, may not have a huge audience, yet, but what we do here still matters, because it's what we do. Given the recent events following the death of George Floyd, I don't believe this is the time for me to amplify my own voice. Rather, this is the time for people in positions of privilege, like me, to listen, learn, help whenever and wherever we can, and work to improve ourselves as allies, anti-racists, and human beings. This episode was already advertised, scheduled, and produced, and so rather than trying to throw something together at the last minute, we're going to go ahead with this episode as planned and work on putting together a thoughtful way to address the events on this platform for next week. Thank you for your patience, and please forgive this display of normalcy. Obviously, things are not normal, and even when they were, normal meant something different for me than it did for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and far, far, far too many more. For now, here are some voices, resources, and organizations to support. Tonight we're joined by Faye Gerbes-Pacht. Faye is a local writer, actor, and educator. She'll be performing a monologue from Things You Can Do by Kristen Palmer. Her character Stevie has returned home seeking a reprieve from the pressures of her stalled PhD. Instead, she's found her family frozen in isolation. Stevie is overwhelmed by feelings of despair and helplessness as she watches the subject of her PhD, the Cryosphere, disappear due to climate change. One day, she falls through the ice. Here's Faye Gerbes-Pacht as Stevie.
The cryosphere refers to the portions of the Earth's surface where water's in a solid form. Sea ice, lake ice, river ice, snow cover, glaciers, ice caps, ice sheets, frozen ground, like permafrost. Like in Canada and Siberia where the ground never thaws, or we thought it would never thaw. The cryosphere affects all aspects of the global climate system, primarily through its interaction with other elements. It's changing radically throughout the world. The river here is ice, partly ice. It's part of the cryosphere. It's the part that I study. The thickness, depth, the wind patterns, frozen water. I thought it would hold me. It looked like it would hold me. Anyways, it's not the first time I fell through. There was a blankness of snow, extending into forever. There was the comfort of work, of routines and rituals. There was a sense of importance, a sense that I couldn't work fast enough, that I couldn't hold on to anything. And then the ice broke. Here. The way the Earth is going to change. The climates, microclimates, water scarcities and floods, new lakes, rivers, streams running frozen, all into free flow. All will be in free flow. And maybe it'll take so long for it to happen, but so long to us is nothing compared to geological time. Like nothing. So I don't know why people find that reassuring. I don't know why anyone finds anything reassuring. Except maybe they think they will be dead. But what about us? What about our kids? And you know, when you are buried in the ground and that ground goes underwater, that water will sink in and long-fingered loose your corpse. And bloated you full of rotty water will taint all you are in contact with. And you'll still be contributing to the mess that your grandchildren will be dying from. better after all to burn.
I had a chance to talk to Faye about this monologue. Here's our conversation. Faye, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you here. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Just to start out, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I am a theater educator. I have been since, well, for a very long time. I actually started when I was in high school. But I love doing theater and working with children and students. Right now, I teach high school theater at Newburgh Free Academy. And I've taught in New York City and I started in Boston. Actually, when I was doing my undergrad, I did some work with children at the Chelsea Theater Zone.
So in addition to teaching currently at the Newburgh Free Academy in Newburgh, you're also the director of the Before Broadway Theater Company at that same school. How did you get involved with that company?
The theater program was actually cut from NFA for a few years, and I was teaching at the middle school. When they reinstated the theater program, I moved up from the middle school with a lot of my students. So I actually ended up teaching that same group of students for 7 years.
What's your experience been like during the quarantine lately?
It's been challenging. We were working on the show She Kills Monsters, and unfortunately, with all the quarantine, we lost the rights, and then we tried to reapply for the rights, and so we were going to try and do it virtually, and then they came up with a virtual version, but it was too late to apply for it. So I still have been meeting with our students, and we're going to be putting on a show from Theater Folk called Mythologues. It's called, which is all done in monologue form, and it's based on all of the Greek goddesses and myths. So it's going to be really interesting. But I also have a 2.5-year-old, so I've been doing a lot of homeschooling as well. She goes to a Montessori school, so there's lots of experimental play and, the starting of pre-K skills like cutting and letter recognition and colors and sorting. So, it's been challenging to balance both those things. And it's also a very big challenge for me to be this still. I'm usually much busier than I am, and that is challenging just for me as a person.
So let's talk about this monologue a little bit. There's a lot of science in it, a lot of terminology and stuff, but there's also a lot of humanity. And I felt like your performance of it really tapped into some of that. I felt very evocative. Can you talk a little bit about your process, either with this one specifically, with any performance you approach or any project?
Yeah, so for me, theater is truth. It always is. So trying to find the truth for this character, but also trying to connect it to truth that I have in my own personal life. So for me, we live in a state park because of my husband's work. So I am surrounded by nature, and I am always in awe when I wake up in the morning and get to see the Hudson River and get to see the deer and the antelope play here. Finding that for this character who's dedicated her life to science and to nature preservation, and her despair in how she can't fix the things that are wrong in her life and in the environment.
Your character in the monologue, Stevie's final line in the monologue is "better after all to burn." What do you think she means by that?
It's one of those things where you don't have the tools to fix something. You might as well just throw it all out and start from scratch.
Global climate change is so large scale and overwhelming. It's one of those things that we're talking about. We tend to talk about it in the abstract because it's so large scale, which can kind of make it difficult to see the trees for the forest. So I felt like it would be useful for our conversation here today to look at how it impacts us on an individual level in the future, certainly, but especially in ways that are already happening today. It may be that one of the reasons people don't engage with climate change as much as they could or should is that it doesn't feel as urgent. as for example, the pandemic, which has for the most part resulted in some large scale global cooperation, but that was also a lot more urgent. So, on a personal note, what are the stakes for you today of climate change? How does it impact your day-to-day life, and what are your concerns about it today, right now?
We have a garbage situation where we live. We don't have access to someone coming up and picking up our garbage and bringing it out because we live in a park. So that means we have to carry in and carry out, just as you would hiking on a trail, but our entire household. So for us, that means trying to consume less, not only for the environment, but also because we have to carry out any box or bag or anything that we bring into the park, right? So the amount of garbage that a household consumes is astronomical, and we are very careful about it, and we still have a lot of garbage, right? So that's number one, is the consumption and the consumption of our society, and how important things and stuff and all of these things are. Secondly is the actual temperature. It's hotter, it's colder. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I was stuck with my students in the Black Box Theater for a dress rehearsal for the play 2 years ago when all those crazy tornadoes took place and came around and swept through Newburgh and Fishkill and you know, the whole eastern seaboard, I guess. Just how scary these weather events are getting and how intense they are getting really does affect your sense of security as a human being. Like, I can't defeat a tornado.
One of the things I've learned was that these longer, hotter summers have led to actually an 83% annual increase in what's called stagnation events. So these are domes of stagnant heat that cause ground level ozone to develop. This is the same as the ozone that's in the atmosphere. When it's on the ground level, it's a dangerous air pollutant. And it can have serious health consequences like cardiovascular or lung disease, asthma attacks, pneumonia, coughing, shortness of breath, cardiovascular damage, susceptibility to infections, and decreased lung functions, especially in children or the elderly. And so even as we are polluting the air less, the air quality is still worsening. So there are millions of Americans today living in areas with an ozone problem. Where I live in Beacon, New York, is right across from where you teach in Newburgh. Do you think that the worsening air quality is affecting your students in Newburgh the same way as it's affecting me in Beacon?
They do have a lot more pollution just because of the city is so large. So you do have more cars and trucks and houses and heating, and so they are definitely more affected by that. But we also have to think about socioeconomic factors that you know, do have an impact on health and then access to healthcare.
Another impact of the longer, hotter summers are increasing rates of tick, flea, and mosquito-borne diseases. They're already skyrocketing. This is already happening today, from 6 to 40% in 2008 to 32 to 58% in 2017. That's pretty scary for me. I'm in the woods a lot. I'd imagine it's pretty scary for you in a few ways, possibly as a parent, even more so.
Yeah, last week's tick count that we physically removed from our bodies was 8 on my husband, myself, my daughter, and our dog. So, you know, we're averaging 6 to 12 a week of removing ticks from our skin. And we're very, very cautious when we come inside. One of my daughter's first phrases that she learned was tick check. And she would, you know, take her shoes and socks off and check between her toes and her ankles. And she would say, tick check, tick check. You know, at the time you're like, oh, she's so cute. It's so precocious. Oh, what a cute little kid. But thinking about that, it's horrifying that this poor little 1-year-old was concerned. And it's scary.
There's a mental health crisis in this country, and at least to some extent, climate change does have an impact on that. Research from the National Academy of Sciences has found empirical evidence to tie climate change to a 2% increase in mental health issues, including stress, anxiety, and even PTSD. This was surprising to me when I first read it, but it makes sense after you think about it for a moment. Mental health is linked to physical and economic well-being. Extreme weather, hot temperatures are disruptive. as a society, we've structured our daily lives around historic and current climate conditions, and when those change, it sends ripples or waves through every part of our lives. Is there any area of your life you could think of that's been disrupted by changing climate conditions?
Yeah, I would say sleep. For me, I'm not a worrier. I'm like a doer. I'm like a get something done kind of a person. So when I see a problem, my first instinct is to do something about it and fix that problem. Much to my husband's chagrin. But for something like this, and these huge problems that we deal with, I have a hard time just turning it off and not thinking about it. So for me, those are the kind of things that keep me up at night. Things like climate change, things like systematic racism, these huge problems that I feel so powerless against. And you mentioned my daughter. Like, what kind of world are we leaving her with? What kind of messes are the next generations and future generations going to have to clean up for us, because we haven't taken the steps to make those changes?
It's a little, I think, a little silly by comparison, but for me, the thing that I feel the most disrupted about is the seasons. I remember even just less than 30 years ago when I was young, and white Christmases were not abnormal. Snowstorms throughout the winter at the time that you expect them were not abnormal. And now I can't think of the last specific time when I had a white Christmas, you know what I mean? And
Right.
Obviously it's not the worst impact of this, but it's something that bothers me on a yearly basis.
Yeah, or snow days if you're in the school system, right? Like, we didn't use half of our snow days the last couple of years, and we get them back if we don't use them in the warmer time. But I want those snow days. I want to go play in the snow. I want to go, that's one way.
Continuing the theme of things that aren't actually that a big a deal, but that I worry about. Climate change is also threatening beer production. Barley crops have been damaged. Hops have been damaged by drought, and some breweries are experiencing shortages of clean water. In a future, hopefully avoidable, where climate change goes unchecked, what do you think you would miss the most?
If anyone knows me, they would probably answer pizza. That's the thing for me. Like, it's the only thing I'll risk my life for right now is a good slice of pizza. But yeah, definitely pizza. I'm sorry, I can't think of anything else. Pizza.
I just learned. I didn't learn. Let me not overstate this. I went skiing for the first time this past winter, and I was pretty bad at it, but I was starting to get better. I'd like to have another chance at it. So
yeah, my sister lives in Utah, and they actually had a huge snowstorm on Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. So for them, it's like, yay, our ski season continued. But it's like, what? How are we going to grow food, right? Just if you think about the things we actually need to live, right? We need clean water and we need food. The climate change is definitely affecting both those things. So what are we going to do about it?
You think that living in a society that has been, anyway, one of abundance, is filtering our ability to understand or perceive the very real and immediate threat to things like the water and food supply?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'll just go buy some more, right? And I think we saw it a little bit with this at the beginning of our lockdown, where toilet paper was nobody could find toilet paper anywhere in any of the stores. But going to the store after that, a lot of shelves were empty. And you had to make concessions, like, okay, they didn't have any black beans, so I had to buy kidney beans. There was still food, and we are still very blessed where we live and the country that we live in and the area that we live in, that there still were options for us to purchase food. But I think it maybe did make people pause and think about what it is to have to maybe sacrifice a little bit and to make those choices and to not have everything that they wanted immediately the second they wanted it. No 2-day delivery from Amazon. I had to wait 4 days for my new agenda planner. It's like, are you even buying an agenda planner right now on Amazon? Where are you going to go? Yeah.
It can be difficult to address something with urgency when it's not impacting you that heavily, when you have food. Look, warm weather, a lot of people like warm weather. As you mentioned, a longer ski season, a lot of people like that. And, when it's something that's immediate that you're enjoying or maybe experiencing positively, to then say, well, if you don't take urgent action right now, in 10 years, there's going to be a lot of bigger problems. It sort of short circuits human psychology a little bit, I think. And yet I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think that kind of happened with, I don't know why I keep talking about this, I'm sorry, but with the coronavirus as well. Like, a lot of people weren't taking it seriously until they did know someone who contracted the virus or was very ill from the virus, or, unfortunately passed away from the virus. So, I think it's hard to show people that they are affected by this.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's mosquitoes. There's so many more mosquitoes, and I am very susceptible to mosquito bites. Like, look, that was just from like 10 minutes ago, right? Me being outside. It's finding something that people can get on board about.
The science that is the basis for climate change has been around since 1859. The term greenhouse effect dates to the 1900s. Modern scientists started sounding the imminent alarm about emissions and global warming in the 60s and 70s. And now here we are with ideally 10 years left at best to prevent irreversible damage. And at this point, with the clock having run out as it has, it's going to take a level of coordinated global cooperation that's unprecedented in human history. Why have we failed? Why are we continuing to fail? What has kept us from taking meaningful action for 40 plus years now?
When I was in second grade, I did a science experiment for the yearly science fair, where I took a fish tank with soil, and I had 3 net bags, and in them was a paper plate, a styrofoam plate, and a Chi-Net plate. And over the course of 2 months, I saw how they broke down in the soil, and I added worms and water and different things. The styrofoam plate was completely intact by the time the experiment was done. The paper plate was, a little bit smushy, and the Chi-Net plate, which is that biodegradable, it's like pulp, basically, that they make from recycled paper, was completely gone. I remember winning the science fair and being so proud of myself and like, I just changed the world. I proved science, and being so heartbroken the next time I went to the store with my parents that they were still selling styrofoam. Like, I proved that this was bad. Why are they still selling it? And the response, from a parent who's like, why are you so upset about something like this? You're so dramatic, because that's me, I'm so dramatic. Was, well, people like styrofoam plates, so they're going to keep selling them. So that's it. Mm-hmm. We as a society keep participating in the things that are bad for us, and we keep supporting them with our dollars or with our 5 stars on Amazon or our thumbs up on Facebook. Those things are going to continue as long as there's an audience, as long as there is a market for it. The manufacturers are going to sell them.
In 2000, when Gore lost West Virginia having previously been a Democratic stronghold, it was at least in part because his opponents painted his environmentalism as a threat to the state's coal industry. Coal is the single largest economic activity that occurs in West Virginia. So it strikes me that far from willfully turning a blind eye to climate change, in the 2000 election, coal miners were voting to preserve their livelihood that year. Conversations about climate change are wide-ranging, and often they address equity, but do we spend enough time talking about people like the West Virginia coal miners, do you think?
I really think this is a human issue, and it's a world issue. But in other countries, they've made it work. In other countries, they have made the change over to more solar and wind power. They have employed the people who used to work in the oil refineries, in the coal mines, in the nuclear plants, and they've trained them for new jobs in green energy sectors. They have transferred dollars that used to support those industries, and they've transferred those to green energies. We can do it if we want to do it, and no one would get hurt except the people who are lobbying so hard for us to stay dependent on coal and oil.
It strikes me, especially as regarding the coal industry in West Virginia, that it's not so easy to just change jobs.
Is there something that we can do as a society or even our government to maybe help them with that transition, maybe pay for their training for a new job, or maybe help them monetarily in the time it takes for them to get a new job? I think there's a lot that we can do. Instead of bailing out the coal industry, maybe we can bail out the coal industry workers and give them a better opportunity to have a better life, so that we can all on this planet have a better life and a more positive future.
Bringing it back to the monologue, as we mentioned before, one of the feelings that comes through in this monologue is that of despair, and we both feel a certain connection to that feeling right now. The name of the play is What We Can Do. On an individual basis, putting aside the giant global problem and the ticking clock, what can we do on a day-to-day individual level?
I think it's really important to, as a consumer, I have choices, and I have choices on what I consume. So there is that. As an individual, I have the choice of where I put my support, whether it be vocally or monetarily. So maybe trying to vote for politicians and policymakers who see your way on certain things, and who actually put the environment and global warming and climate change. They bring that to the front and center. They actually make policy that can affect change. I think that's probably the most important right now. But on my day-to-day, just there's a lot of things you can even do online right now. There's plenty of petitions you could sign. There's plenty of organizations that you can follow and see what they're doing. We saw it just this past week. There were 9 or 10 different protest marches. That's something I can do as an individual.
I read somewhere that if cows were a country, they'd be the planet's 3rd largest emitter, and that stuck with me.
Yeah, Meatless Mondays.
Yeah.
Start there. I don't eat a ton of meat. I do eat a ton of pizza, so that is cows making the cheese, and I do get that.
But it doesn't have to be something. You don't have to turn around and say, "I'm a vegan now." That's it. You can.
No. Even one less cheeseburger a month would make a difference. Mm-hmm. That's what I say about consumption. Like, you're choosing where to put your money, and you're choosing to support the cow industry. You're choosing to support the oil industry when you make those choices. So, if you can take one less trip in your car a week,
5-minute car ride or 20-minute walk, just walk.
Right, just walk. Yeah, I mean, right now you got the time.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you sitting down today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was lovely. And I do feel like we need to, one more time, disclaimer, we are not scientists. We are 2 theater people who like to talk about stuff. I have to put that out there. My views no way reflect my husband or my school district. Or
Yeah, that's important. That this is an unofficial conversation in your capacity as an educator, and
yes.
In no way reflects on. Yeah. Can you tell us about any upcoming projects?
Yes, I'm actually doing a fundraiser with doing the Vagina Monologues with the Secret Creature production. And I am also working with my students for a show that we're going to be putting on in a couple weeks called Mythologues. And my husband and I are actually, in the evenings after our daughter goes to bed, we've been writing a musical. So that's been really fun. He's a wonderfully talented musician and lyricist, and I've been writing the book and really developing these juicy characters. It's been really fun. Yeah. That's
very exciting. When you told me about that earlier, I asked you what the musical was about. Can you tell me what you said?
Did I say, if I tell you I gotta kill you? No.
No, I felt like it was implied.
It's about hope.
think hope is just what's needed. So I'm glad that you're with
Yes.
us. Well, thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good luck with everything, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ed.
In New York's Hudson Valley, the climate is changing faster than the national and global average. Within the next 80 years, the Hudson River will rise between 2 and 4.5 feet due to increased precipitation. In Beacon, where I live, the waterfront park will be cut off from land. Storms and flooding will threaten shoreline infrastructure and development, rail lines, hazardous waste sites, wastewater treatment plants, and the water supply, not to mention human life. The temperature of the river will continue to rise, and fish species will die off. Average days per year over 90 degrees will increase from 10 to as many as 76 days per year above 90. Rates of Lyme disease and the Zika virus will skyrocket. Species migration will impact the ecosystem, bringing more invasive species to the area. Human migration from the New York City metro area will strain resources and development. Growing seasons for agriculture will be affected and food supply lines will break down. And that's just in Beacon, and just in the short term. In 1979, the first World Climate Conference was held in Geneva. Scientists from around the world agreed urgent action was needed to curb global carbon emissions. By the Second World Climate Conference in 1990, a proposal had taken shape, a 20% reduction of carbon emissions by 2005. But already, a decade had slipped away. One of the first American leaders on climate change was George H.W. Bush, who helped launch the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. At this time, climate change was considered a non-partisan concern. But throughout the 90s, the fossil fuel industry sowed doubt in the legitimacy of climate science. Because the push for green energy affected so many industries, the question became perhaps inevitably political, a trend which catalyzed in the 2000 presidential election. And another decade slipped away. West Virginia is one of 2 states that produce the most coal in the country, Wyoming being the other. West Virginia and Wyoming also have the highest rates of climate science denial. This is no coincidence. In asking ourselves how the issue of climate change became so politically divisive, it's easy to point a finger at self-serving propaganda from the fossil fuel industry. But we would do well to remember that, from the perspective of someone working in the fossil fuel sector, in a state like West Virginia or Wyoming, it's not always quite so simple. A third World Climate Conference was held in 2009 with the goal of finding a global framework to combat climate change. But of course, by then, another decade had slipped away. In the past 10 years, ambitious attempts to address the problem on a global scale have proven ineffective, and the subject has become more divisive than ever before. We have 10 years left. The decade to come will slip away as quickly as the last, as quickly as each decade has slipped away since 1979. We have 10 years left. Thank you for joining us tonight. Act and React is a Find Your Light production brought to you by Safe Harbors of the Hudson in Newburgh, New York. Safe Harbors' mission is to transform lives and build community through housing and the arts. Supporters of Safe Harbors play a vital role in providing housing for our neighbors and bringing accessible and affordable, world-class visual and performing arts to our community. To be a part of this momentum and make a meaningful impact on the Newburgh community, please visit safe-harbors.org to make a secure donation or volunteer to help. Thank you again. See you next week on Act and React.